My first 11 is blokes I'd love to have a beer with. I'm opening the batting with the one and only Rick Darling.
Yes.
A Waikerie boy from country South Australia. A flashy opening batsman. Look, he played... I should have looked up his stats before I joined you, but I reckon he played about 20 test matches, Rick Darling. And interestingly, he played his last test match when he was 22. So you would have thought he had plenty of cricket left in him.
Wow. Good stat.
And his high score 91. And there is a couple of great stories around Rick Darling. One being that he got hit in the heart by a Bob Willis bouncer at Adelaide Oval. And Flem, can you remember who revived him? Who was the English player?
John Embry.
John Embry. John Embry, whose birthday is today, just by the way.
Great man.
And I only know that, Pete, because it's my birthday as well. Yes. Well, Rick Darling, my other Rick Darling story, Flem, and you'll love this. One day at Adelaide Oval, because Rick Darling is a lad, right? A proper lad, right? So he's on the hill getting blind with his mates from Waikerie one day, right, during a test match. The Australians had a couple of injuries that day. So the next day, the 12th man was on the ground, but they called up Rick Darling. So the next day, he's on the ground fielding. The day before, he was blind on the hill.
That's good.
That is my kind of guy right there. Now, I'm going to get controversial really quick with his opening partner here. I've gone for a bloke who never played a test match for Australia.
Ooh.
But he would have, at one point, he was the best cricketer in the country. It's just that he was too old by the time we played our first test match, and that's Tom Wills. Tom Wills wrote the rules of AFL football, but was the best cricketer in the colony for his entire life, basically. He pulled together the first Aboriginal touring team that went to the UK. Tom Wills managed that team. But Tom Wills was a roaring pisshead. And I reckon it would have been fun to spend a few nights on the town with Tom Wills. He was not opposed, if you believe the biographies, to just smashing a couple of cans before he went out to bat on an uncovered pitch, if you don't mind, without a helmet, and just knock up a tasty 100. Player I loved as a kid, Javed Miandad, I'm putting in as my first drop. A lot of people didn't like Javed Miandad, but I thought when he raised his bat to Dennis Lilly that day, I just looked at him and I thought, oh, I like this bloke. He's got a bit of fire in his belly. He just had that touch of bad boy flair about him. I got the feeling that if you hung out with Javed off the field, anything's possible. Anything can happen. And I just can't avoid this, but I'm going for Buff at number 4.
Yep. I was waiting for him to pop up.
Pete, you know Buff well.
Yeah.
And you would have definitely had more beers with him than I have. Have you enjoyed his company on those occasions?
Unbelievable beer drinker, Buff. No, he's great. If you number 4, solid position for him. He'll control the innings from there, I think, just nicely.
But Buff's last season of first-class cricket coincided with an Ashes tour in Australia. It might have been when we regained the Ashes. It might have been that tour, 2005, 2006, I think. And there was a tour match where England played South Australia at Adelaide Oval, obviously. It was in November of that summer. So they still hadn't finalised the squad, but it was most likely he wasn't going to get picked in our Ashes team. Anyway, Buff goes out the night before that game started, that tour match, and I have it on good authority that he might have had a couple. Then Buff's come out and batted for South Australia, and in one of the great stories, he's hit 99 and has done he had 90. He had 98, and he did a single, and he tried to make it back for 2, and he got run out on 99.
What's he doing going for a quick 2?
Of all the people who shouldn't be taking a quick 2, it's not only is it Buff, it's a hungover Buff. could be taking a quick two. So Buff at number 4. Next up, coming in at number 5, I've got my cricketing hero as a kid. I had his poster on my wall, and he was a rock star to me, and that's David Hooks. Coming in at number 5, just that 34 ball ton against Victoria. I listened to that on the radio, and that was just one of the most exciting. It's one of the most exciting things I've ever heard on a radio, David Hooks. And the scoreboard, when Hooksy, I think he was 101 not out, and Rick Darling, who was known for his flair, was on 10. So they were the 2 opening batsmen. Hook 101, Darling 10. Next up, that's Ritchie Richardson. I feel like he gets lost in the West Indies conversation because everyone just jumps from Viv to Brian Lara. But Ritchie Richardson was uber cool for me as well. Didn't wear a helmet either, and he just had that nice bit of flair about him as well. My wicketkeeper, all the way from Afghanistan, Mohammad Shahzad. The bloke who's carrying a few kilos. But I reckon he has a crack. Is Keith Miller I'm choosing as my all-rounder. Keith Miller, I especially love Keith Miller for 2 reasons. One was his famous quote about being asked how he's going to handle the pressure of an Ashes test match. And having just been a fighter pilot in World War II, he said, pressure, try a Messerschmitt flying up your ass. That's pressure. Not batting against England. And the other great thing I love about Keith Miller is my dad, as a 16-year-old, got together in country South Australia with a bunch of cousins, a whole bunch of them, about a dozen of them, piled in the back of a truck in 1948 or 1947. They drove to Adelaide, which back then took about 6 or 7 hours, to watch Don Bradman play. And the Don, towards the end of his illustrious career, got a bloody duck.
No.
They travelled for half a day to watch the Don get a duck. I think one of 3 ducks in his career, but Keith Miller hit 142 not out. So thanks, Keith, for putting a smile on my young dad's face. Next up, opening to bowling, I've got Malcolm Marshall. I don't really have any idea what Malcolm Marshall would be like as a bloke, but he was another player who, as a kid, I just loved. I wanted him, even when the West Indies played Australia, I wanted Malcolm Marshall to get 8 wickets and hit a ton in every innings. And one of my great frustrations as a kid was Malcolm Marshall was a pretty good batsman.
Yeah.
But he either never really got the opportunity because they had such a strong batting lineup ahead of him, or I just felt as though he always threw his wicket away, and it annoyed me because I wanted him to make runs as well. Like I wanted him to be a genuine all-rounder. But I bloody love Malcolm Marshall. Next up, I was going to pick Phil Tufnell, but I've gone for Daniel Vettori because I wanted to get a Kiwi into my team. And a bloke who has glasses and a beard, which is what I'm sporting right now. You can't go wrong. And he just strikes me as a ripping bloke, Daniel Vettori as well. Yeah. But batting at 11, Salil Ankola. Now, you're looking at me blankly, which is fair enough. He's Indian, and I've picked him for 2 reasons. One, he debuted in November against Pakistan in November 1989. Another player debuted in that same test match, and that was Sachin Tendulkar. So they debuted together. Sachin Tendulkar went on to play 200 test matches for India and become the most famous Indian ever. And I'm including Gandhi in that, right? Salil Ankola went on to play no more test matches. That was it. So I just want to sit down with him and say, mate, are you okay?
Sounds like he needs a beer.
He needs a beer. I'll tell you, interesting fact about him, though, he did go on to win the first ever season of Big Brother in India.
Whoa.
But I'd like to chat with him just to see what it's been like for him watching Sachin Tendulkar become the most famous person ever from that day in November